Story 1. I should have realized something was off the moment Rick offered me that apartment. We were finishing the closing shift at Danny's Burgers, the kind of joint where the grease never truly washes out of your clothes, no matter how many times you try, and the customers treat you like you're subhuman. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting that sickly yellow glow that made everyone appear as if they were dying from jaundice. For the third time that day, I was scraping down the grill, my back aching from being bent over the damned thing for 8 straight hours. When Rick appeared beside me, he was wiping his hands on his apron, but they never really got clean. None of us ever did working at Danny's. The stench of old grease and industrial cleaner had embedded itself permanently in my pores, following me home each night like a greasy ghost. My apartment above the laundromat reeked of it, mixing with a perpetual smell of fabric softener and detergent from the machines below. "Hey, you still in that studio above Wong's Wash and Fold?" he asked, leaning against the prep counter. His voice had that casual tone people use when they're trying to sound nonchalant about something significant. I nodded, not looking up from the stubborn grease stain I was attacking with steel wool that had seen better days. The studio was barely 400 square feet of misery, with industrial washing machines downstairs that ran until 2 in the morning every single night. I'd grown used to falling asleep to the sound of spin cycles and the tumbling of other people's dirty laundry, but it was hardly restful. "Yeah, why? I'm moving out of my place next week. Finally moving in with Sarah," he grinned, but there was something off about it. Something that didn't quite reach his eyes, as if he were forcing the expression. Underneath was an eagerness, a kind of relief that seemed disproportionate to simply moving in with a girlfriend. "It's nothing fancy, but it's cheap and close to work. You'll thank me later." The way he said that last part stuck with me. "You'll like it, or it's a good deal, but you'll thank me later." As if he were doing me some enormous favor I wouldn't understand until later. The tone was almost patronizing, like he knew something I didn't. The rent he quoted was half of what I paid for my cramped studio. Half I could actually afford groceries if I moved there, maybe even save a little money. Hell, I might even be able to quit picking up double shifts every weekend just to make ends meet. After 2 years of living paycheck to paycheck, surviving on ramen and whatever food Danny's let us take home, the prospect of financial breathing room was intoxicating. "Seriously?" I asked, finally looking up at him. "That's it. What's the catch?" "No catch," Rick said, but he looked away when he said it. His eyes darted toward the window, then back to me, then down to the floor. Body language I'd learned to read from years of dealing with customers who were about to complain. Just a basic 1-bedroom. Building's older, built in the 50s, but it's solid. Landlord's not a pain in the ass like most of them. I should have asked why he was leaving if the place was so great. I should have asked why the rent was so impossibly low for this area, especially being close to downtown. I should have noticed how eager he seemed for me to say yes, the way he kept glancing at the clock like he had somewhere urgent to be. Instead, I just saw dollar signs and the chance to live somewhere that didn't shake like an earthquake every time someone used the industrial washers below me. "All right," I said, going back to scraping the grill. "I'm interested." Relief flashed across Rick's face so quickly I almost missed it. His whole posture relaxed as if he'd been holding his breath. "Great, perfect. I'll get you the landlord's number. Mr. Hoffman, real straightforward guy." He walked away immediately after that, almost bouncing on his feet. I watched him disappear into the back office, wondering why he seemed so happy to be getting rid of an apartment he'd lived in for over a year. But 15 minutes later, he was back with a phone number scrawled on a Danny's receipt, and by the end of my shift, I'd already left a voicemail for the landlord. Story 2. 3 days later, I met Mr. Hoffman at a downtown coffee shop. He was a nervous man in his 60s, thin and pale with thinning gray hair, wearing a brown suit that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. His hands shook slightly when he handed me the lease paperwork, and he kept checking his watch during our brief meeting, like he had somewhere urgent to be. But it was a Tuesday afternoon, and the coffee shop was nearly empty except for a few college students with laptops. "The previous tenant left recently," he said, not meeting my eyes. When he spoke, he kept his gaze fixed on the paperwork, shuffling pages unnecessarily. "Very clean, very quiet. No problems whatsoever." How long did they live there? I asked, scanning the lease terms. Everything looked standard, maybe even generous. The security deposit was reasonable. No weird clauses about pets or guests. Not long, he said quickly, almost cutting me off. A few months, job transfer, you know how it is. Out of state, had to leave quickly. I didn't really know how it was, but I nodded anyway. The lease was straightforward, the deposit reasonable for the area. When I asked about building amenities, Hoffman just mumbled something about laundry in the basement and working elevators. He seemed eager to get the paperwork signed and get out of that, constantly glancing toward the door like he expected someone to walk in. Any building rules I should know about? I asked as I signed my name at the bottom of the lease. Quiet hours, guest policies, that sort of thing. His pen slipped when I asked that, leaving a small ink blot on his copy of the lease. He stared at it for a moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Rules? No, standard apartment stuff. When the trash goes out, whether I can have people over, noise ordinances. Oh, right. Standard stuff. Nothing unusual. He gathered up the papers quickly, his hands moving faster now. You can move in this weekend. Key pickup is at the building. The super lives in 1A, but he's not around much. You'll get the keys from the lockbox. He left immediately after I signed, practically speedwalking out of the coffee shop. I watched him through the window as he got into an old blue sedan and drove away, checking his rearview mirror twice before pulling into traffic. The whole interaction had taken maybe 15 minutes, which seemed rushed for signing a year-long lease. Story 3. Moving day was a joke. Everything I owned fit into my Toyota Corolla and a borrowed pickup truck from my coworker Martinez. My entire life was reduced to maybe a dozen boxes, a mattress that had seen better days, a used couch I'd bought off Craigslist for $50, and my pathetic collection of kitchen supplies that barely filled one box. Rick showed up to help carry the heavy stuff, which wasn't much. He seemed different that day, more energetic than usual, but also distracted. He kept glancing around the street while we loaded boxes, like he was looking for someone. When we reached the building on Maple Street, he moved faster, like he wanted to get the job done and leave. The building was a narrow 4-story brick structure squeezed between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. It had that particular look of buildings from the 50s, functional but not fancy, with small windows and an entrance that had probably been updated sometime in the 80s with cheap aluminum and glass. The lobby was tiny, just a row of mailboxes and a button-operated door to the upper floors. Everything was clean but worn, like it had been maintained but not improved in decades. "This is you," Rick said when we reached the 3rd floor, unlocking the door to 3C with keys he pulled from his pocket. Home sweet home. The apartment was bigger than my studio, but still modest. A small living room with a window facing the street, a kitchen with actual counter space and cabinets that closed properly, a bedroom with room for more than just a bed, and a bathroom with a real tub instead of just a shower stall. The previous tenant had left the place spotless, almost sterile. No personal touches, no forgotten items in drawers, no marks on the walls where pictures had hung. It was like no one had ever really lived there, just passed through temporarily. "Pretty nice, right?" Rick said, but he was already edging toward the door. He kept checking his phone like he was expecting a call. "Look, I should head out. Sarah's making dinner and you know how she gets when I'm late." I'd never met Sarah, didn't even know her last name, but I nodded anyway. "Yeah, sure. Thanks for helping with the move. No problem. You'll like it here." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say something else, something important. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Then he just nodded and left, taking the stairs 2 at a time like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. I spent the rest of Saturday unpacking and getting settled. The apartment had good natural light during the day and the neighborhood was quiet. Maple Street was mostly residential with a few small businesses, the kind of area where people minded their own business. I could hear my neighbors through the thin walls of television from the unit below, footsteps from upstairs, the occasional door closing in the hallway. Normal apartment sounds that were somehow comforting after months of industrial washing. Machine noise. Around 7 that evening, I was putting dishes away in the kitchen cabinets when I found it. A yellowed piece of paper was taped to the inside of the cabinet door above the sink. The tape was old and brittle, curling at the edges, and the paper looked like it had been there for years. The handwriting was done in blue ballpoint pen that had faded to a grayish blue in places, shaky like someone had been nervous or scared. While writing at the top, in slightly neater letters that looked like they'd been written with more care, someone had written, "Rules for 3C. Below that, a numbered list in that same shaky handwriting. 1. Always lock your door by 9:31 p.m. sharp. 2. Do not look into any reflective surface after 12:15 a.m. 3. If you hear keys jingling outside, turn off all lights and stay silent until they stop. 4. Never use the elevator after midnight. Take the stairs, but skip the 4th floor entirely. 5. If a child knocks and asks to come in, open the door, but only if it's exactly 3 knocks. 6. Never open the blinds after sundown. 7. If you hear someone calling your name from the hallway, do not answer. 8. Flush the bathroom sink for 15 seconds before using the water after 2 a.m. 9. Do not leave your unit between 3:33 a.m. and 4 a.m. for any reason. 10. When the fire alarm goes off after 4 a.m., follow the barefoot boy. I stared at the paper for several minutes, reading through the list twice. The rules were bizarre, ranging from oddly specific times to completely incomprehensible instructions. Who was the barefoot boy? Why 9:31 exactly, not 9:30 or 9:45? What was supposed to happen if you looked in a mirror after midnight, and what was on the 4th floor that you needed to skip it entirely? My first instinct was to laugh. Some kind of inside joke, maybe. Apartment humor left behind by a previous tenant with too much time on their hands and a weird sense of humor. I almost threw it away, crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash with the rest of the moving debris. But something made me hesitate. The handwriting looked genuinely urgent, like whoever wrote it had been scared when they did it. The paper was old, too, not something someone had whipped up as a prank yesterday. The ink had that faded quality that only comes with years of exposure to air and light. Instead of throwing it away, I left it taped where it was and continued unpacking. Maybe the next tenant would get a kick out of it. Around 8:30, I met my first neighbor. I was taking a bag of trash to the hallway chute when a door opened across from mine. An elderly woman peered out, her gray hair in pink foam curlers, wearing a faded floral housecoat that had probably been stylish in the 70s. She had sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that seemed to take in everything about me in a single glance. "You're new here," she said. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact delivered in a voice that had probably been telling people exactly what she thought for 70 years. "Just moved in today." Don't test the list," she interrupted, her eyes darting to my door and back to my face. Her voice was urgent, almost pleading, like she was trying to warn me about something genuinely dangerous. "Just don't." Before I could ask what list she meant, what she was talking about, she retreated into her apartment. I heard the sound of multiple locks engaging deadbolt chain, at least 2 other locks I couldn't identify. The hallway fell silent again, leaving me standing there with my trash bag, wondering what the hell that had been about. Mrs. Leary, according to the name on her mailbox. She'd said the list like she knew about it, like she knew about the rules taped inside my kitchen cabinet. How could she possibly know about that? Asterisk story 4/9/15. I was settled on my second-hand couch with leftover pizza from lunch and a beer I'd been saving in my mini fridge. The apartment felt comfortable enough in the evening light, cozy even. The thin walls meant I could hear my neighbors living their lives, television's occasional conversation, someone cooking something that smelled like garlic and onions, normal apartment sounds that made the place feel lived in despite its sterile appearance. I was scrolling through my phone looking at job listings because Danny's Burgers wasn't exactly a career path when I heard a sharp metallic click from my front door. I looked up from my phone, confused. The sound had been distinct, like a lock turning or a deadbolt engaging. But I was sitting in my living room and nobody else was in the apartment. I hadn't heard anyone in the hallway, no footsteps or voices, or the sound of someone approaching my door. Just that single sharp click that seemed to come from the lock itself. I got up and checked the door. It was locked, deadbolt engaged, chain latched. I didn't remember locking it when I came back from the trash chute, but maybe I had done it automatically living alone. You developed habits like that, especially in a new place. I checked my phone. 9:31 exactly. The coincidence with the first rule made something cold settle in my stomach. But old buildings made weird noises all the time. Settling foundations, temperature changes, old wood expanding and contracting as the day cooled into night. That had to be it. Just a coincidence. Nothing more. I went to bed around 11 o'clock, tired from the long day of moving and unpacking. The bedroom was at the back of the apartment, facing an alley instead of the street, and much darker than I was used to. The previous tenant had left thin white curtains that barely blocked the security light outside, casting strange shadows across the walls. I made a mental note to get better ones soon, something thick enough to actually block out light. I was almost asleep, that drowsy state where thoughts start to blur together, when I heard it, keys jingling in the hallway. It wasn't loud, just the soft metallic sound of someone approaching their door with their keys ready. Normal apartment noise that I'd heard 100 times in my old place above the laundromat. People coming home from work, from dates, from whatever they did with their evenings. Except this went on too long. Like someone was standing right outside my door, playing with their keychain, not moving toward their own apartment, not walking past to the elevator or stairs, just standing there making that soft, rhythmic, jingling sound. My phone showed 11:45. Without really thinking about it, I reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. The room went completely dark and immediately the jingling stopped. Just like that, total silence in the hallway, like whoever had been out there had simply vanished the moment the light went out. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own heartbeat, waiting for some normal sound to break the silence. Footsteps walking away, a door opening or closing, the normal sounds of someone going about their business. But there was nothing. Just the deep quiet of a building settling into night. After maybe 30 seconds, I turned the light back on. Still nothing from the hallway. I waited several more minutes, straining to hear anything, then convinced myself it had been nothing unusual. Someone had dropped their keys, picked them up, and gone into their apartment quietly. That was all. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. The apartment was dark, except for the green glow of the emergency exit sign filtering through the peephole and the light from my phone's screen. The hardwood floors creaked slightly under my feet, old wood settling after decades of footsteps. As I washed my hands at the bathroom sink, I glanced up at the mirror above it and froze. My phone showed 12:03. Rule number 2 said not to look into any reflective surface after 12:15 a.m. I was safe technically, but something made me look away from the mirror quickly. For just a fraction of a second, I could have sworn I'd seen a dark shape behind me in the reflection, tall and thin and wrong somehow, like a shadow that didn't match anything in the room. But when I turned around, nothing was there. Just my empty hallway, just shadows and the normal darkness of an apartment at night. I went back to bed, but sleep was much harder to find now. The apartment felt different in the deep night, less welcoming. Every small sound seemed amplified and somehow threatening. The settling of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on the street below, the whisper of air through the heating vents, sounds that should have been comforting were now making me hyper-aware of every creak and groan in the walls around me. At exactly 3 a.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 knocks, soft, polite, evenly spaced. "Can I come in?" A child's voice asked through the door, high and clear, definitely young. "It's cold out here." I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Rule number 5 flashed through my mind. If a child knocks and asks to come in, open the door, but only if it's exactly 3 knocks. 3 knocks. The rule said to open the door, but every instinct I had, every alarm bell in my head screamed against it. What child would be wandering the halls at 3 o'clock in the morning? What if it was some kind of trick, some kind of trap? What if it wasn't really a child at all? "Can I come in?" the voice asked again, smaller now, more plaintive. "Please, I'm really cold." The voice sounded genuinely young, genuinely frightened, but something about it was off, something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was too clear, too articulate for a scared child. Maybe it was the way it carried through the door without any of the muffling you'd expect from someone standing in a hallway. I stayed silent, pulled my blanket higher over my shoulders, and waited. My hands were shaking slightly, and I realized I was holding my breath again, the way I had when I heard the keys jingling. "Please," the voice said one more time, barely, a whisper now. "I'm so cold." Then I heard small footsteps retreating down the hallway, slow and deliberate, fading until I couldn't hear them anymore. Just silence again, deep and complete. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Story 5. The next morning felt like waking up from a fever dream. Sunlight streamed through the thin bedroom curtains, and the apartment looked completely normal again. The shadows that had seemed so threatening in the darkness were just ordinary corners where walls met. The hallway outside was quiet, except for the occasional footstep and muffled conversation from other tenants starting their day. I almost convinced myself that the previous night had been nothing more than first night, nerves in a new place. Almost I called in sick to Danny's Burgers. The thought of spending 8 hours scraping grease off a grill while running on no sleep felt impossible. Martinez covered my shift without asking questions. He'd done the same thing when he moved into his place 6 months ago. New apartment, anxiety, he'd called it. Around noon, I ventured out to grab some groceries and get a feel for the neighborhood in daylight. Maple Street looked different during the day, more welcoming. The used bookstore next to the building had interesting titles in the window, and there was a decent coffee shop 3 blocks down. Normal neighborhood life, the kind of place where people walked their dogs and complained about parking. I was coming back from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I met him. A boy was sitting on the stairs between the 2nd and 3rd floor, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing striped pajamas that looked like they belonged in a different decade. No shoes, just bare feet that looked pale against the dark carpet. He had sandy brown hair and large, serious eyes that seemed too old for his face. "You didn't let me in last night," he said without preamble, his voice matter of fact. That was smart. They were close. I nearly dropped my groceries. This was the child from the night before, the voice that had asked to come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. In daylight, he looked completely ordinary, just a kid who should have been in school on a Tuesday afternoon. I started, then realized I didn't know what to say. "You're the one who knocked down Thomas," he said, like that explained everything. "I live here too, sort of." He stood up and I noticed he moved silently, his bare feet making no sound on the carpet. "They don't usually come so early, but they knew you were new. They wanted to test you." Thomas glanced toward the 4th floor, then back at me. "The ones who don't follow rules, you should be more careful about the blinds." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, not walking away, not running, just gone, like he'd never been there at all. I stood in the stairwell for a full minute, grocery bags cutting into my arms, wondering if I'd imagined the entire conversation. Back in my apartment, I unpacked groceries and tried to make sense of what Thomas had said. The blinds, I looked toward my living room window where the cheap vertical blinds were open, letting in the afternoon light. Rule number 6, never open the blinds after sundown. I'd read it, but I hadn't really thought about it. What was the harm in looking out a window? I spent the rest of the day trying to establish some kind of routine and packed the last few boxes, arranged my limited furniture, tried to make the place feel like home. But Thomas's words kept echoing in my head. They were close. They don't usually come so early. Who were they? As evening approached, I found myself checking the time obsessively. 6:30, 7:15, 8:45. At 9:25, I walked to my front door and stood there waiting. At exactly 9:31, I heard that same sharp click as the locks engaged themselves. No longer a coincidence. The apartment was following its own schedule with or without my participation. Around 10 o'clock, I was washing dishes when I realized I'd left the blinds open. The sun had set maybe an hour ago, and the street outside was dark except for the occasional streetlight. I could see into a few windows across the street, people watching television, someone cooking dinner, the normal domestic scenes of evening life. I reached for the blind cord, then stopped. Across the street, in a window that perfectly mirrored the position of my own living room, I could see an apartment with its lights on, same layout as mine, same general furniture arrangement. Someone was moving around inside, just a silhouette against the lit interior. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. The building across the Street was a mirror image of mine. Same brick construction, same window placement, same general architecture, and the lit window was in the exact position as my apartment. 3rd floor, same side of the building, apartment 3C's equivalent. The figure in the window was tall and thin, moving with an odd, jerky gait that didn't look quite human. As I watched, it stopped directly in front of the window and seemed to look back at me. I yanked the blind cord so hard it nearly broke, sending the vertical slats clattering closed. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. When I peered through the slats a minute later, the window across the street was dark. I spent the next hour pacing my apartment, checking the locks, making sure the blinds were completely closed. Every shadow seemed threatening now. Every small sound amplified. The comfortable daytime apartment had transformed back into something else. Something that felt like it was watching me. At 1:15 a.m., I heard the keys jingling again. This time, I was ready for it, sitting on my couch with all the lights off, just waiting. The sound started soft and rhythmic, the same pattern as the night before. I remained perfectly still, following rule number 3 exactly. Then I heard voices in the hallway. Told you the meeting ran late, a woman was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. I couldn't just leave in the middle of the presentation. I'm not saying you should have, a man replied. I'm just saying next time, maybe text me, so I don't worry. Normal couple conversation, the kind I'd heard 100 times in apartment buildings. They were coming up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The key jingling stopped immediately, replaced by something else. Slow, deliberate knocking on my door. Not the soft knocks from the night before. Heavy, methodical knocks that seemed to vibrate through the wood. Knock, knock, knock. Each one spaced exactly 3 seconds apart. Like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. The couple's voices faded as they reached their floor, probably the 4th, based on the sound. The knocking continued, patient and relentless. I could see a shadow moving under the door, blocking and unblocking the thin line of hallway light. Someone was standing right outside, shifting their weight back and forth. I heard the soft metallic sound of a key being inserted into my lock. The deadbolt turned with a click that seemed impossibly loud in the silence, but the chain held, preventing the door from opening more than an inch. Through that narrow gap, I caught a glimpse of pale skin and what looked like coveralls or a uniform of some kind. The key tried again, turning more forcefully this time. The door strained against the chain, wood creaking under pressure. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The shadow under the door disappeared. The key went silent, and the hallway returned to normal quiet. He doesn't like locked doors, a small voice whispered behind me. I spun around to find Thomas standing in my living room, still in those striped pajamas, still barefoot. He hadn't come through the door. I'd been watching it the entire time, but there he was, as solid and real as anything else in the room. How did you? I live here, Thomas said simply. I can go anywhere in the building. He looked toward the door with those 2 old eyes. That was the caretaker. He has keys to everything, but the chains give him trouble. For now, what does he want? Same thing they all want. To add you to the building. Thomas moved to the window, through the blinds at the street below. You're doing better than most. Usually, people break 3 or 4 rules on the second night. What happens if you break the rules? Thomas was quiet for a moment, still looking out the window. Depends which rule. Some just make them angry, others ... He turned back to me. ... You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be harder. Wait, I started, but he was already fading, becoming translucent like morning fog. How do I follow the rules? His voice echoed as he disappeared completely. All of them. Every night. I stood alone in my living room, heart still racing from the encounter with whatever had been outside my door. The caretaker, Thomas had called him, someone with keys to everything, someone who didn't like locked doors. I checked the locks again, made sure the chain was secure, then sat back down on my couch to wait for dawn. At 1:45 a.m., I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I wasn't looking directly at it. I was checking the street outside through a gap in the blinds, making sure nothing was moving around out there. But in the corner of my vision, I could see my own face reflected in the glass, distorted slightly by the angle and the darkness outside. For a second, everything looked normal. Then my reflection moved differently than I did. I was perfectly still, but the reflection tilted its head slightly to the left. When I blinked, it didn't. When I raised my hand to touch the glass, the reflection smiled. Not my smile, something else's smile. Using my face, I jerked my hand back and stumbled away from the window, knocking over a lamp in my haste. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. Just dark glass showing the empty street outside. But I could still feel that smile, cold and knowing, like something had been watching me through my own face. I didn't go near any windows for the rest of the night. Story 6. The next morning brought a text from Rick. How's the new place? Getting settled in okay? I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could I explain what was happening without sounding crazy? How could I tell him about Thomas, about the caretaker, about my reflection moving on its own? It's fine, I typed back. Thanks again for the hookup. He responded immediately. No problem. Told you you'd thank me later. That winking emoji felt wrong somehow, loaded with meaning I didn't understand. But before I could think of a response, my phone rang. Danny's Burgers, wondering if I was coming in today. I told them I'd be there for the afternoon shift, needing the normality of work and a paycheck to ground me in something real. But as I got ready to leave the apartment, I found myself checking the rules one more time, memorizing them like a prayer. 10 simple instructions that were apparently keeping me alive, though I still didn't understand why. Outside, Maple Street looked normal again. People walking to work, cars navigating morning traffic, the bookstore opening its doors for the day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the windows above. Something that wore faces that weren't quite its own. I walked to work wondering how many nights I could follow the rules perfectly and what would happen when I inevitably slipped up, because people always slipped up eventually. That was just human nature. And whatever lived in the building on Maple Street was counting on exactly that. The third night started normally enough. I'd made it through another shift at Danny's Burgers, avoiding Rick's increasingly frequent questions about how I was settling in. There was something in his eyes when he asked, a kind of eager curiosity that made my skin crawl, like he was waiting for something specific to happen. Martinez noticed me checking my phone obsessively throughout the evening shift. You okay, man? You've been weird since you moved. Just adjusting, I told him. But the truth was, I'd been counting hours until I had to go back to the apartment. Each night felt like a test, and I wasn't sure how many I could pass before my luck ran out. I got home around 10:30, already mentally preparing for another night of following the rules. The apartment felt familiar now, but not comfortable. Familiar the way a prison cell becomes familiar. You know every corner, every sound, every shadow that shouldn't be there. At 9:31, the locks clicked as usual. I'd stopped being surprised by it, just another part of the building's strange rhythm. I made myself a sandwich, checked that the blinds were closed, and settled in to wait for whatever the night would bring. At exactly midnight, the lights went out, not just in my apartment. I could tell from looking under my door that the hallway was dark, too. No gradual dimming, no flickering warning. One moment I was reading on my couch, the next I was sitting in absolute darkness. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, the harsh white beam cutting through the blackness. Outside, I could hear doors opening, concerned voices calling to each other across the hallways. Mrs. Leary's voice carried clearly, "Stay in your apartments. Don't go wandering tonight." I made my way to the window and peered through the blinds. The entire block was dark, a power outage affecting the whole neighborhood, but something was wrong with the darkness in our building. Even with the streetlights out, there should have been some ambient light from the city, maybe a few emergency lights in the hallways. Instead, the building seemed to exist in its own pocket of absolute black. As if responding to my observation, a few weak backup lights flickered on in the hallway, casting everything in a sickly red glow that seemed to make the shadows deeper rather than lighter. The emergency lighting system was working barely, but it felt more ominous than helpful. I was making my way back to the couch when I heard it. Ding, the elevator. Ding, ding, ding. Rule number 4 flashed through my mind. Never use the elevator after midnight. Take the stairs, but skip the 4th floor entirely. The elevator was calling repeatedly, that cheerful electronic sound completely out of place in the oppressive darkness, like it was summoning someone or something. I crept to my door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was bathed in that red emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the far end of the hall, I could see the elevator doors standing open, revealing nothing but empty interior space. But the smell hit me even through the door. Rot, decay, something that had been dead for a very long time. It was rolling out of that empty elevator shaft like fog, filling the hallway with the stench of decomposition. Ding ding ding, the sound was getting more insistent, faster now, like an electronic heartbeat racing toward panic. I pressed my eye closer to the peephole and could see that the elevator was completely empty, just a hollow metal box that reeked of death. But somehow that emptiness was more terrifying than if something had been standing there. It felt like a mouth open and waiting to swallow whatever was foolish enough to step inside. The doors kept trying to close, then opening again, as if the elevator couldn't decide whether to contain that awful smell or release it into the building. Each time they opened, another wave of that rot stench rolled down the hallway. I backed away from the door, heart hammering. The dinging continued for another few minutes, then stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the sound at 1:30. I heard 3 soft knocks on my door. This time, I didn't hesitate. Rule number 5 said to open the door if it was exactly 3 knocks. And after what I'd seen with the elevator, I needed Thomas's help. I undid the chain and deadbolt opened the door just wide enough for a small figure to slip through. Thomas appeared immediately, still in those striped pajamas, still barefoot. "You're learning," he said, but his usual calm was replaced by something like urgency. "That's good. You're going to need to follow everything exactly tonight." "What's happening?" "The power. It's not really out," Thomas interrupted, moving to the window and peering through the blinds. "They just made it dark so they can move around easier. Stay away from the 4th floor tonight." "Why? What's on the 4th floor?" "That's where they gather when they're hunting." He turned back to me, those 2 old eyes serious. "The landlord's wife doesn't like to share, but tonight's different. Tonight they're working together." Before I could ask what that meant, Thomas faded slightly, becoming translucent. "They're coming," he whispered. "Remember the rules, all of them." He vanished completely just as I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Multiple sets of feet moving with the same measured pace. I quickly locked my door and turned off the flashlight on my phone, plunging my apartment back into darkness. The footsteps passed by my door without stopping, but I could hear them continue down the hallway, then up the stairs toward the 4th floor. Heavy boots, something that dragged slightly, and underneath it all, the soft sound of keys. JINGLING. Story 7. At 2:15 a.m., I was in the bathroom when the jingling started again. I'd been trying to use the toilet by the light of my phone when the familiar sound began right outside my apartment door. Rule number 3. Turn off all lights and stay silent. But I was in the bathroom, and rule number 8 suddenly became relevant. Flush the bathroom sink for 15 seconds before using the water. After 2 a.m., I was trapped between 2 rules. Standing in my dark bathroom, listening to the keys jingling in the hallway outside. I needed to flush the sink before using any water, but the sound would violate Rule 3. My mouth was dry from fear, and I desperately wanted to splash some water on my face, but not without following Rule 8 first. The jingling grew louder, more aggressive. Whoever was out there was directly outside my door now. The sound of keys rattling together in a rhythm that wasn't quite random. It sounded almost like Morse code, like they were trying to communicate something. I made my decision. I turned on the sink faucet and let it run, counting off 15 seconds in my head while the keys continued their metallic song outside. The running water seemed impossibly loud in the silence, but I forced myself to count the full 15 seconds before shutting it off. The jingling stopped immediately. Then I looked up into the bathroom mirror. She was there behind me in the reflection, tall, unnaturally thin, with skin that hung loose around hollow cheekbones and eyes that were just dark holes in her face. The landlord's wife. Her mouth was open in what might have been a smile, revealing too many teeth that looked sharp and wrong. Her fingers were pressed against the back of the mirror, scratching at the glass from inside the reflection. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, high and piercing. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. She was staring directly at me through the mirror, and I realized that if I met her gaze for more than 3 seconds, something terrible was going to happen. I'd been looking for maybe 2 seconds already, but time seemed to be stretching, moving like honey. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, getting closer. The caretaker making his rounds with those blood-stained keys. I could hear them, jingling again right outside my bathroom door now. Here, Thomas whispered from somewhere beside me, though I couldn't see him. Stay low. Suddenly, I felt small hands pulling me down, guiding me to crouch behind the bathtub. Thomas had materialized beside me, his finger pressed to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. He positioned himself between me and the mirror, blocking my view of the scratching woman. We huddled there in the darkness while the footsteps paced back and forth outside the bathroom door. The scratching on the mirror grew more frantic, more desperate. But with Thomas blocking my line of sight, the landlord's wife couldn't catch my eyes again. The jingling keys grew fainter as the footsteps moved away, heading back toward the hallway. Only then did Thomas relax, his small form becoming more solid again. She can't follow you if you don't look, Thomas explained quietly, but she knows you saw her now. She'll be waiting. Waiting for what? For you to look again in any reflection after midnight. She's patient. We stayed hidden until the footsteps faded completely. Then Thomas helped me out of the bathroom, carefully guiding me past the mirror without letting me see it again. How long does this last? I asked once we were back in my bedroom. Until dawn. They go back to wherever they go when the sun comes up, but they're getting stronger each night, more aggressive. Why? Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring at his bare feet. Because you haven't left yet. Most people break the rules by the 3rd night, and then he made a gesture that somehow conveyed complete disappearance. But you're still here, still fighting. It makes them angry. We sat in silence for maybe 20 minutes, listening to the building settle around us. Occasionally, I heard footsteps in the hallway or what sounded like doors opening and closing, but nothing came near my apartment. At 3:35 a.m., I smelled smoke. It started as just a hint, like someone had burned toast somewhere in the building, but it got stronger quickly, seeping under my door, invisible tendrils that looked gray-white in the darkness. My first instinct was to run. Every fire safety lesson I'd ever learned said to get out immediately, to feel the door for heat, and evacuate the building. I was reaching for the door handle when Thomas grabbed my wrist. It's not fire, he said urgently. Don't open it. But the smoke, it's not real smoke. It's them. They're trying to make you break Rule 9. His grip on my wrist was surprisingly strong for a child. You cannot leave your unit between 3:33 and 3:43 a.m., not for any reason. The smoke continued to pour under the door, filling my apartment with what looked and smelled like the aftermath of a house fire. My eyes were starting to water, my throat burning slightly. Everything in my body was screaming at me to get out, to run from what seemed like immediate danger. But what if it is real? I asked, my voice starting to rasp from the smoke. Then, we die following the rules, Thomas said simply. But if you open that door now, if you try to leave, you'll die anyway, and it won't be quick. I backed away from the door, pulling my shirt up over my nose and mouth. The smoke continued to thicken, making it harder to see across my own apartment. It was getting difficult to breathe, and every instinct I had was telling me that staying in a smoke-filled apartment was insane. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. The smoke was so thick now I could barely see Thomas sitting beside me on the couch. My lungs burned, my eyes streamed, and every rational part of my brain was screaming that I was going to die if I didn't get out of there. At exactly 3:43, the smoke vanished. Not gradually, not like it was being ventilated out of the building. It simply disappeared, leaving the air clear and breathable again, like it had never been there at all. Rule 9, Thomas said quietly. They really wanted you to break that one. I slumped against my couch, adrenaline leaving me shaky and exhausted. How much longer can I do this? Thomas looked at me with those ancient eyes in his young face. One more night, he said. Tomorrow they'll try everything at once. All the rules, all the entities, everything they have left. If I can survive that, what happens? If you survive, then it becomes someone else's turn. Thomas started to fade again, becoming transparent in the darkness, ... and the cycle starts over. Wait, I called after him, but he was already gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my bedroom chair, fully dressed, watching the clock on my phone count down the minutes until sunrise. At exactly 6 a.m., the power came back on. My apartment suddenly blazing with normal electric light. The building was quiet again, peaceful. Even I could hear Mrs. Leary moving around in her apartment, the sound of someone upstairs getting ready for work, all the normal sounds of people starting their day. But when I looked in my bathroom mirror to splash water on my face, I could see faint scratch marks on the glass, like something had been trying to claw its way through from the other side. Tonight would be the fourth night. Thomas had said they would try everything at once. I called in sick to work again and spent the day researching the building's history, looking for any information about previous tenants, about accidents or disappearances. But there was nothing unusual in the public records, just a normal apartment building with normal turnover rates. The only thing I found was a small news item from 6 months ago about a tenant named David Chen who had simply vanished from apartment 3C, leaving behind all his belongings and a month's rent paid in advance. The police had investigated but found no signs of foul play. He'd just disappeared without a trace. As the evening approached, I realized I was probably going to disappear too, just like David Chen, just like whoever had written those rules on that yellowed piece of paper. But I also realized I wasn't going to go quietly. If this was going to be my last night in apartment 3C, I was going to follow every single rule perfectly, no matter what they threw at me. And maybe, just maybe, I'd live to see another sunrise. Story 8. The fourth night began with an ominous calm. I'd barely slept during the day, my body running on pure adrenaline and the knowledge that this was supposed to be the final test. Thomas had said they would try everything at once, throw all their supernatural weight at me in one last desperate attempt to claim another victim for the building. I prepared like I was going to war. I checked every lock twice, made sure the blinds were sealed tight, verified that I had water in the bathroom sink ready for the 2 a.m. rule. I even practiced the timing for various scenarios, counting off 15 seconds in my head while imagining the sound of keys jingling outside. At 9:31, the familiar click of the locks engaging felt like the starting bell for the most dangerous night of my life. But hours passed in unusual quiet. No keys jingling at 11:45. No elevator dinging at midnight. Even the building's normal settling sounds seemed muted, like the entire structure was holding its breath. By 3 a.m., I was starting to think maybe they'd given up. Maybe surviving 3 nights was enough to prove I couldn't be broken. Maybe I'd won some kind of supernatural standoff through sheer stubborn adherence to an impossible set of rules. I should have known better. At 4:15 a.m., the fire alarm exploded into life. The sound was deafening. A piercing electronic shriek that seemed to come from speakers hidden in every wall of my apartment. This wasn't the gentle beeping of a smoke detector. This was the building's full emergency evacuation system, designed to wake the dead and send everyone scrambling for the exits. Rule number 10 flashed through my mind. When the fire alarm goes off after 4 a.m., follow the barefoot boy. Thomas appeared instantly beside my bed, more solid and urgent than I'd ever seen him. His usual calm was replaced by something approaching panic, those ancient eyes wide with fear. "Follow me and don't stop," he said, grabbing my hand with surprising strength. "They're all coming now. Everything the building has left." I stumbled out of bed, still in my clothes from the day before. Through my apartment walls, I could hear other tenants responding to the alarm. Doors opening, confused voices calling out questions, footsteps heading toward the stairwells. Normal people following normal fire evacuation procedures, completely unaware that something far more dangerous than flames was hunting through the building. Thomas led me to my front door, then stopped. "When we go out there, don't look back. No matter what you hear, don't look at any reflective surfaces. Don't respond if anyone calls your name. Just follow me and run." I nodded, my heart already hammering against my ribs. Thomas unlocked my door when had I given him the ability to do that, and we stepped into the hallway. The building had transformed. What should have been a familiar hallway was now something from a nightmare. The walls stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness above the emergency lighting. The carpet beneath our feet felt soft and wrong, like we were walking on something organic rather than synthetic fibers, and the hallway itself seemed to go on forever. Door after door receding into a distance that couldn't possibly fit within the building's actual dimensions. "This way," Thomas whispered, pulling me toward what should have been the stairwell. But as we ran, I realized we were no longer in the same building I'd lived in for 4 days. The apartment numbers on the doors were wrong, some showing impossible combinations like 3x or 7 1/2. Others had no numbers at all, just dark wooden doors that seemed to absorb the emergency lighting. Behind us, I heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving with inhuman coordination. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. They were both there, visible in full form for the first time. The landlord's wife moved like a broken marionette, her impossibly tall frame folding and unfolding as she walked. Her skin hung in grey tatters around bones that were too long, too angular to be human. Her face was a hollow-eyed nightmare, mouth stretched in a permanent scream that showed rows of needle-sharp teeth. She moved without making a sound, floating rather than walking, her tattered dress trailing behind her like funeral shrouds. Beside her, the caretaker was a study in methodical menace. He was shorter than her, but broader, wearing coveralls that had once been blue but were now stained with decades of rust and something darker. His face was paper white and perfectly smooth, like a mannequin's, with empty eye sockets that somehow still managed to track our movement. The keys hanging from his belt were covered in dark stains that looked fresh despite the keys themselves appearing ancient. Each step he took left wet footprints on the carpet, though I couldn't tell what liquid was seeping from his boots. "Faster," Thomas urged, his small hands surprisingly warm in mine. "They're gaining." We reached what should have been the stairwell, but the door opened onto another impossibly long hallway. This one was different, older, with peeling wallpaper that showed glimpses of faces hidden in the pattern. The faces turned to watch us as we passed, their eyes following our movement with predatory interest. "Where are we going?" I gasped, my breath coming in short bursts. "Out," Thomas said simply, "but they're going to try to separate us. When that happens, remember, always take the path that goes down, never up. Up leads to them." As if summoned by his words, the hallway ahead of us split into a T-junction that definitely hadn't been there a moment before. The caretaker's heavy footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear the wet sound of his breathing, like someone trying to breathe through water. "Left or right?" I asked. Thomas started to answer, then suddenly pushed me hard to the left. "Go, I'll meet you at the bottom." What about a sound like breaking glass exploded behind us? I turned to see the landlord's wife bearing down on Thomas, her impossible arms stretching like rubber to grab him. Her mouth was open in that eternal scream, and this time, I could hear it a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard mixed with the death rattle of something ancient and furious. Thomas darted away from her grasping fingers, leading her down the right hallway. "Go," he yelled over his shoulder. "I'll be fine." I ran left, my feet pounding on carpet that felt increasingly spongy and organic. Behind me, I could hear the caretaker's methodical pursuit, his keys jingling with each step. But something was wrong with the sound. It was getting fainter instead of closer. I risked another look back and saw him standing at the T-junction, his pale face turned toward me. His keys lay scattered on the floor around his feet, dark stains spreading outward from each one like spilled ink. He was staring at me with those empty eye sockets, and I realized he was waiting for me to make a choice. The hallway ahead split again, this time into 3 paths. One lead up via a staircase that seemed to spiral into darkness. One lead straight ahead into what looked like the same endless corridor, and one led down toward what might have been basement level, though I'd never seen stairs to a basement in the building before. Thomas's words echoed in my head, "Always take the path that goes down." I took the stairs down 2 at a time, the sound of my footsteps echoing strangely in the narrow space. The walls here were different, older brick instead of plaster with moisture seeping through the mortar. It felt like I was descending into the building's original foundation, into whatever had been here before the apartment complex was built. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into a darkness that the emergency lighting couldn't penetrate. My legs were burning, my lungs screaming for air, but I kept running because I could hear something following me. Not footsteps. This time, something that sounded like claws scraping against stone. Finally, mercifully, I saw light ahead, real light, not the red glow of emergency systems, but the pale gray of early dawn. I burst through a door that should have led to a basement, but instead opened directly onto the building's front lobby. Daylight streamed through the windows, beautiful and impossible after the nightmare of twisted hallways and pursuing monsters. The lobby looked completely normal, worn but clean carpet, rows of mailboxes, the same button-operated door I'd used to enter the building 4 days ago. I stood there gasping, hands on my knees, trying to process what had just happened. The fire alarm had stopped, leaving the building in perfect morning silence. Through the windows, I could see Maple Street, coming to life, people walking to work, cars navigating morning traffic, all the normal rhythms of a city waking up. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I turned to see a young woman standing near the mailboxes, keys in her hand, looking concerned. She was maybe wearing a coffee shop uniform and a worried expression. "I'm fine," I managed, though my voice came out as a croak. "Just ... early morning jog." She nodded, though she clearly didn't believe me. "I'm Sarah, by the way. I'm moving into 3C today. The previous tenant left really suddenly, but I got a great deal on the rent." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah, Rick's girlfriend, the woman Rick was supposedly moving in with, which was why he'd needed to get rid of his apartment so quickly. "Rick's girlfriend?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yeah, he's been so helpful with the whole process, actually helped me get the apartment," said he knew the previous tenant. She smiled brightly, completely unaware that she was about to walk into the same nightmare I'd just escaped. "He should be here any minute to help me move my stuff." As if summoned by her words, the lobby door opened and Rick walked in carrying a coffee and wearing that same false smile I'd seen at work. When he saw me standing there disheveled and gasping, his expression shifted to something I could only describe as disappointed surprise. "Hey," he said carefully. "What are you doing here so early?" I looked at Rick, then at Sarah with her bright smile and her keys to apartment 3C, then back at Rick. He knew exactly what I was doing here. He knew about the rules, about the entities, about everything that happened in that apartment after dark, and he was about to let it happen to her just like he'd let it happen to me. The smart thing would have been to warn her, to tell her about the rules, about Thomas, about the things that lived in the building's darkness, to save her from 4 nights of terror that would either kill her or traumatize her for life. But I was tired, bone deep, soul deep, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I'd survived something that most people didn't survive, and all I wanted was to walk away and never think about apartment 3C again. "Just out for a walk," I said, moving toward the door. "Good luck with the move." I didn't warn them. I just walked past, grateful to be alive. Outside, the morning air felt like freedom. I walked down Maple Street without looking back, each step taking me further from the building and its impossible rules. I had no idea where I was going. My old studio above the laundromat was gone. My job at Danny's Burgers felt like a lifetime ago, and I had nothing but the clothes on my back. But I was alive. I was free. And whatever happened to Sarah in apartment 3C was no longer my problem. Behind me, I heard Rick's voice drifting through the lobby windows. "It's nothing fancy, but it's cheap and close to work. You'll thank me later." The cycle was starting over. I kept walking and I didn't look back. I didn't warn them. I just walked past, grateful to be alive.